Good morning again, our ladies and gentlemen. We will start this session. It's about time, actually. People maybe will join us a bit late. This session is about sustaining the environmental rights and sustainability. We have actually 4 distinguished speakers from all over the world. Sustainable development is very crucial for our world. And without actually the sustainability, we will not guarantee that for our next generation, any life, any opportunities. So we have really to keep the environment and always think about the future. We have actually 4 nice lectures. One of them about sustaining the global water resources will be given by Margaret Catley Carlson from Canada. And the next one will be about biodiversity and biotechnology and its relation to sustainability. And then we will have Dr. Nokrashi from Germany, and he's going to talk about desert tech and solar energy. And then Dr. Karadesh from Icarda, and he's going to give a talk about soil physics and water resources. We will start with Margaret Catley Carlson. Margaret actually is a biovisionist by nature, and she has already participated in most of the biovisions before. She is the chair of the Foresight Advisory Committee for Group Sewage Environment, the Crop Diversity Trust, member of the UN Secretary General Advisory Board in Water, and the IFDC Fertilizer Council, World Food Prize and Synergetia Foundation Board, World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council, Rosenberg Forum, Canadian Water Network. And she also has many previous positions. She is the previous president of CEDA, deputy EDU UNICEF in New York, and vice president of the Population Council in New York. She's the previous deputy minister, Department of Health and Welfare, and she has honorary degrees and received an official officer of Canada. We are happy to have Maggie with us, and she's really fabulous, and I'm sure you're gonna enjoy her talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There we are. Okay. Make sure I've got this going properly. Good. Okay. You'll know from the introduction that I'm not a hydrologist or an agronomist or an agrologist or any kind of science specialty. I work with good scientists in all of the dimensions that were mentioned in the introduction, and I have come to have a lot of appreciation about the importance of policy and about finding financing for various water issues. So that's my perspective on these things, but you won't find this as to be a scientific presentation in the sense of being backed up with data and research and charts. Well, I was delighted to see the title, Sustaining Environmental Rights and Responsibilities. The 20th century was a century that spent a lot of time talking about rights and very little time talking about responsibilities. So I want to talk about how, by our choices, we can exercise some responsibility in the whole issue of water. Okay. First of all, I will make you an expert in water very quickly. When people say to you, isn't it dreadful that there is less and less water in the world? We have the same amount of water globally as the dinosaurs or Julius Caesar. It's a closed system, and so therefore we are working with the same amount of water that has always been on the planet. The problem is, and if you live in Egypt, particularly if you know MENA region, you know that water is a question of time and place and people's use. But the whole system still has the same amount of water that we had since the beginning. That offers some solutions, but the solutions become more imperative depending on the time and place. When we had 1 billion people, the water So the water situation in most places was not that critical. We shared water uses. Always this has been one of the drier areas. But today, with 7 billion heading for 9 billion, the situation is critical. How do we know it's critical? Well, we've got about 70 rivers closing. What does that mean? We've abstracted all we can from the river. I mean, when I fly out of Cairo and I see the Nile River disappear in the delta and in the desert, it always gives me a very strange feeling that the Nile no longer reaches the Mediterranean except in a little bit of outflow. There are 70 rivers around the world that do not reach the sea or do not reach their previous outfall because of human use of the water there. That is a very serious issue because it means that the deltas, it means that the ecological and the environment and the livelihoods of the delta systems have been very much changed. There are quality and quantity problems everywhere for water. Egypt is, of course, in a unique water situation. Because of population growth, the per person availability of water continues to go down and down, even though we have the magnificent Nile flowing almost all the way through Egypt. We've got, and you've got the relationships up and down the Nile, which is certainly a series of unique relationships. As prosperity grows, we use more water. We'll talk a little bit about that. And as I say, water is unequal in time and space. Now, what's this little green triangle down here? Because you're going to be seeing, that's what we're going to be talking about, and that's the nexus of demand for water. And on one corner of that little triangle, you've got agriculture. In another corner, you've got energy. And in another corner, you've got the use we make for water in terms of industries, human beings, etc. So that's called the Nexus triangle. And we're going to be talking about the demand for water and how responsible decisions can make that water more plentiful. Okay, this is the Earth's water. It looks like a complicated chart. It's put out by one of the American intelligence agencies, but it's not so complicated. It says here's all the water. Whoopsie. It says here's, it's a watery world, obviously. You can see it there. But the oceans take up 97%. And so there's just this 3% or 2.5% left for fresh water. There's the fresh water. But of the 2.5% of that, most of that water is wrapped up in glaciers, groundwater, permafrost, the surface and atmosphere. And so therefore we only have 2% of that 2% to actually work with in terms of the water that we all use. A lot of that is in freshwater lakes, soil moisture, wetlands, rivers, and vegetation. But the water is scarce in terms of the usable water that we have compared to the very large mass. This side is what we use the water for. And look at the big one, agriculture, 68% globally. Often a bigger number depending on the country. Usually more industrialized countries use less water than that. But you can see this is what we use it for. Power, 10%, et cetera, et cetera. There's the use we make of it. And as I say, the consumption use, in other words, when you use it, the water's gone, agriculture is 93%. So keep that in your mind as the kind of water that we have and where our decisions, responsible or not, start to make a difference. There's lots and lots of ethical and intergenerational issues about water and water management. How does our water use affect others? If we have water, what will happen after? And Egypt is very concerned about Ethiopian growth and Ethiopian future plans because they are very worried about the effect on others. Ditto the Sudan. How do our use patterns affect the next generation? If we're pulling water out of an aquifer that was put down at a totally different geological age, that aquifer is not going to come back. Some aquifers are restored by rainfall, by different underground patterns, but we know a lot about how groundwater, how aquifers get where they are, and if we are pulling water out, the case in Libya, from an aquifer that is highly unlikely to be restored, there's an intergenerational implication. Are we polluting? If you pollute water, it isn't available there for either you or somebody else to use. If we trade development for pollution, that's not a good deal. Our agricultural patterns are such that we constantly pollute water. When we talk about pollution, usually people have in mind smokestacks and industrial pollution, but in fact agriculture is a bigger polluter of water than industry or than cities. And that's nitrates, phosphorus, a big problem. The responsibility that we have for water is hardly talked about. The right are very much talked about. If we go back here, when we talk about the right to drinking water, as you can see up here, drinking water is only about 2%, is only about 7% of the water use. So out of the 2% of the 2% of the 2%, only 7% is drinking water. And that's where we talk about having a right to water. That's what the UN talks about as a drinking water right. We've got to take a look at all these other uses, in other words, so that we can keep exercising the right to clean water. Another ethical choice is the responsibility. Who in our societies is taking the responsibility of making sure that water is available for all possible uses and sectors of society? Who's accountable for this? Whoever reports. How do you know what's going on about water? Who is reporting to you as a citizen in a way that you can actually understand about the availability of water, its condition, etc.? And how much demand, responsible demand, are you making in the work of your exercising your own responsibilities? Is it transparent? Lots of countries make water information available, but without a double PhD in statistics and something else, you would never understand anyway what was on. So the water reporting has to be transparent and clear, and there needs to be education about water, about the nexus and the increasing stringency of water. Why are we concerned about water? Well, we've been talking enough at this conference about food that I don't have to explain these charts to you. This is food increased calorie consumption going up this axis, across the time axis on the bottom, and it's a good news story in that just about everybody on the planet has more to eat than was the case 10, 20 years ago on a per person basis. But look at what's written across the bottom. It takes a liter of water to produce every calorie. A liter of water to produce every calorie. 1 billion people, 2,500 calories a day, equals a certain number of liters of water used in agriculture. Move that to 5 billion, to 7 billion, to 9 billion, multiply by 2,500 calories, and look at the amount of liters. Look. Okay, this one's back on. Good. Okay, so that's why there is this incredible linkage between water and food. It takes a liter of water to produce every calorie that we eat. More of us, or more demand from each of us because of prosperity, means a great deal more demand for water. This is one of the places where responsibility comes in. Look at that purple part of the increasing growth for cereals. This is more and more water for cereals. That purple part is not food that we eat directly. It's fodder and feed that we feed to animals, because with prosperity, our demands increase for protein. And so therefore, it is The huge demand for extra water is the demand for meat, chicken, all the rest of it. It takes a metric ton of water to produce a kilo of wheat, but it takes about 9 of them to produce a kilo of beef, about 5 to produce a kilo of chicken. So this is where your own responsibility, it starts to come in terms of how much water you're actually using. I listened to my speeches far too hard, and I finally gave up eating meat. I decided I really couldn't go on telling the world about this and still keep on eating meat. So I finally, about 3 years ago, decided that my personal contribution to trying to rebalance the use of the world's water would be about that. It's not just in agriculture. We have water use for energy. We are tremendous energy users, and again, with prosperity, energy use goes up and up. We even talk about having a right to energy. Energy is an enormous water user. Look, every time there's extraction, refining, hydropower, thermal electric cooling, that all takes water for energy. But guess what? It takes a lot of energy to produce water too. In California, it's about 28% of the state budget goes into the water bill, the electricity bill, the energy bill for pushing water around, putting it through pipes, collecting it back, and then taking it away and cleaning it up. And so therefore, we've got tremendous water use in energy, and we've got tremendous energy use in water. If we want to make a difference in this, we have to start understanding how our systems in our own countries, in our own cities, are actually using the energy in our water and using the water in our energy. We can also make a responsibility decision by trying to use these responsibly, but mostly we have to take much more interest in how we're using this. The ethics, this brings up the ethics or the responsible use of water reuse. And this was in the New York Times 3 days ago. And I liked it so much I copied it down and put it here. I'm just going to read you, I don't believe in reading slides, but I'm going to read the first line here. It says, without mining an ancient aquifer or draining a natural spring or piping the pricey harvest from a greenhouse gas and brine generating desalination plant, there is a solution to provide a valuable source of extremely pure water. Reclaim it. Reuse it, recycle it. Egypt is getting better and better at this, but if you want a career that can make a difference, start in this country with how you could more responsibly reuse water. Now this talks about sewage. There's an awful lot of water that isn't sewage. There's all the gray water, there's the industrial water, there is all sorts and kinds of water that can be recleaned, recycled, and reused. How do we get out of that green triangle stresses and strains, and where do we go from here, and how does biochemistry or biotechnology actually help? Well, we talked about reducing the demand for water and energy, and that we can be responsible. They are not just claiming a right, but using responsibility. But we also have to agitate and act and speak up for better rational water use and better agricultural use of water and more rationalized municipal use. We can add our voices to the need to invest and develop into water, energy, and agriculture, and we can develop practical and sustainable tools, and we're going to hear about some of these in these presentations. We also need to advocate and be advocates for policies that promote the efficient uses of resources and sustainable practice. When we simply think about the consumption needs, we end up claiming a right without a responsibility. We can change the world. Cities can be their own catchment area. There's very exciting stuff that's being done in some cities where you start making a city as an entity that takes in water but then uses it, recycles it, reuses it, harvests the wastewater, reuses the gray water, and then the water goes out and goes to agriculture. So if we start thinking about how technology and how science and how our own personal decisions and habits can be used, we will find that we are adding to the supply of water instead of simply claiming our right. From a traditional, and we have been working this way, a single objective spending about water, i.e. go and capture it from somewhere, pipe it, take it through a house, a factory, all the rest of it. We need to really start thinking about the multiple use. Reducing conventional water supply network, more water for environmental flows and ecosystem services, and better livelihood opportunities have to be what we're after. We've got lots of helpers to allow biotechnology to be more helpful. One of them is membranes, where we've an astonishingly forward movement in the last 20 years, where membranes can help us not just with desalination, but also the cleaning of the water that I just talked about. Moving gray water through shopping malls, through residential developments, you use a membrane, and water treatment plants can be very small. They're still energy using though. And so it isn't a free lunch, but we can, by intelligent design, do a much better use of using membranes, using biotech, and using good science and good technology, clean up the water before we release it, and so that we can reuse it. The Gold Coast in Australia has changed their building codes, and so now you can imagine a large apartment building that the gray water is which is dishwasher, washing machine, bath water, hand washing water, etc. Not the black water, but the gray water is goes through pipes, goes through a small water cleaner, and then goes back into the water systems, because it's as clean as it would be if it came from a new water source. And there's a little bit of new water that's added in every time. You're not recycling toilet stuff here. You're not recycling sewage, but you are recycling the available water and cutting down enormously on the need for new water. So Xi'an University saves its campus very high water bills by recycling water. It's used many times at Xi'an University. Skyscrapers in New York have even started doing a tentative in this direction. So from the campus to cities to residential areas, it is possible to make a change. But the important element here is not the technology, it's the municipal code changes, it's public opinion, which is you, it's political leadership. All those new buildings all over Egypt, there's opportunities there as well as costs in terms of water. There are water opportunities. I had some examples here, but I think I'll be using other people's time if I talk to it. There are good examples around the world where wastewater is being treated to provide a reliable source of water, not just for drinking water, but for power production, to augment drinking water supplies, etc. It's not just large ones. If you're interested in this subject, go to WaterWiki. There's a fascinating group of 38 small case studies on decentralized wastewater treatment, which are in use in villages, using the capture of the resources of wastewater, which of course are the nutrients that we then should be putting back in the plants, but also methane, also biogas. Go and look at WaterWiki and find out what kind of small decentralized water treatment plants exist, and they are very essential, particularly as you're still a 40% rural area here, in terms of getting the best use out of the water and the most responsible. Water is a complex issue. This is another way of looking at that little green triangle. Water is needed for energy. Water is needed for food. Food can be used to produce energy. Food can be in the sense of biofuel. Food transports water. It's a very complex chain here of causality. We like to claim water. We like to, as I say, the drinking water right that was talked about in the United Nations is up here. Just the very small amount that is drinking water, we like to claim the rights. But what I hope I'm getting you convinced with is that we have responsibilities that go right throughout the system in terms of our consumption patterns, what we advocate, what we talk about, what we decide to study, and what we do with our lives in terms of using water responsibly. Thank you very much.
It's actually my privilege to introduce Dr. Klaus Ammann. He's from Switzerland, and he was actually the assistant in Swiss Atlas of Plant Distribution. He was a lecturer in plant biodiversity and vegetation ecology. He is a previous director of Bern Botanic Garden, and he is the previous chair of the European Expert Committee on Plant Conservation, Council of Europe. He was the founding member of Planta Europa. This is actually the Swiss Biodiversity Committee. He conducted several Swiss and European research projects on gene flow, plant conservation, lichen biogeography, vegetation history, vegetation ecology, plant systematics, and actually he is the man of the ecology and biodiversity. And his talk today will be about biodiversity and biotechnology and its relationship to sustainability. Klaus, please, the floor is yours.
I feel at home here in Alexandria, having given talks even before the Bibliotheca was opened. And ever since then, I return here and see a lot of young people, growing amounts, and this is rewarding. And my activities are actually really coming from a broad range. And in addition to that, I have married some 20 years ago a Bulgarian philosopher. And I learned a lot from her, and that changed not only my marital life, but also my spiritual life. And you will hear about that. So, last year I was in Kuwait to give you an answer, consulting the Biotech Institute, and I made a range of good proposals, and I don't know what happened with it up to now. But I can send you the proposals, and they include, for instance, a new way of producing energy with seaweeds, where you have rich resources in the Red Sea. And actually this would be a rich source of energy and close to the way you collect energy now from oil. You of course have to change completely the refinery series and so on. But actually this would be a possibility. And I thank Maggie for her talk. She gave a whole range of innovative suggestions about what water could help and how we could change the situation. And I am also an optimist. If only we come to these conclusions and to these decisions to really change our systems in producing food, in using water, it is possible, but to overcome this kind of inertia, we need to go a bit deeper into our behavior, about our concept of sustainability, and so on and so on. It will not be easy. My concept of sustainable world is having a column in agriculture, in Socio Economics, and in technologies. That's another concept. And it contains a lot of new and innovative ideas. And I just don't want to talk about the agricultural part. That will be part of my talk. And the socio-economics, you will see, it's a dialogue including new creative capitalism. Hi. New ideas. We need desperately to change our economic system. It has been shown that the credit crunch is not the solution in the end. The banks are not the solution for everything. They also need to change. So we need to be more audacious. But how come? How can we overcome this kind of inertia and this kind of laziness of thinking and not being innovative enough? I must tell you that today I will give a lot of time about urban myths. I think one of the major obstacles of our thinking innovative is that we hang to old myths. We still, the Greens, the Green Party, which I love, and they do a lot of good things and they target the right things, but they still think nature is serene, stable, eternal, and we should touch it as little as possible. And some opponents even come close to creationism when they defend the serene nature. I have lived as a botanist in serene nature in the mist forests of Jamaica, which have remained the same for millions of years. And I can tell you, I had somehow a feeling like being in a church. It was a religious feeling. It was full respect for these kind of things. Look at here at the doctor bird with his long tail. That's a hummingbird, an endemic bird to Jamaica, and a very rare thing to photograph. And he's pollinating Markgraphia here. Anyway, and then the contrast, soybean production in Argentina, and horror, if you see that. But economically highly productive and wonderful for the farmers. And they love to produce these soybeans in this way. But they destroy the nature nearly completely. And of course, you have you get some problems. Look at this, for instance, the growing amount of herbicide-resistant weeds. Also the blue ones here. These are the glyphosate herbicide-tolerant weeds now, which are becoming more and more a problem to the United States agriculture and to the Brazilian and the Argentinian agriculture, but not because of genetic engineering, but because of a dead wrong agricultural management system, which they should change, and there are possibilities. And even Monsanto offers some new solutions there. Anyway, look at what a wise man like Leonardo da Vinci said about nature. It's full of infinite causes that have never occurred in experience. And he also said, although nature commences with reason and ends in experience, it is necessary for us to do the opposite. That is, to commence with experience, and from this to proceed to investigate the reason. So that's a very wise word, and you see the influence of my wife as a philosopher. But I think it's important to go deeper into the analysis of the things, and to not just perceive nature as something which should not be touched. This is a statistics from New Zealand showing a clear relationship between opposition to biotechnology and the wrong concept of nature. It has been statistically proven. I don't want to go into the details. You see here the text, and you can tap into the full publication. There are clear relationships between this wrong concept of nature and this resistance to modern innovation in agriculture. Agriculture is the origin of renewable natural resources, including energy, as Maggie told us. This is our chance to change agriculture into a modern system. We must go into this. And traditional agriculture, for instance, related to rainforest, that's a horrible thing. Slash and burn is destroying the rainforests, and has nothing to do with a wise treatment of nature. This is unwise, done by the Amazon Indians, and nothing else. Anyway, look at this. That's a surprise for you, maybe, as Egyptians. I have attended a meeting with Ayatollah Rafsanjani in Tehran to create ISA, a new Iranian unit of ISA to promote modern biotechnology in Iran. And look what he said: rationality dictates us not to avoid any new technology, says Ayatollah Rafsanjani. Huh? Wow. So it's a myth to say that Islam is basically against this innovation. That's nonsense. But this myth is prevailing in Central Europe, I can tell you. There are a lot of bad stories going along, and I will show you that this is not true. Biotech crops are detrimental to biodiversity. That's the other mantra of the Greens. This is just not true. I don't want to go into the details, but here you see, for instance, that if I can sum it up, if I would be a non-target insect and I would have the free choice to choose a conventional maize field or a BT biotech maize field, I would certainly go to the BT maize field because there I am less sprayed with pesticides and I have a better life. This is clear. So biodiversity is making profits out of biotechnology. It's the contrary. It's not true the other way around. And of course, if I am honest, then I would like to go to holidays to an organic farmer as a non-target insect, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, there are statistics, there are meta-studies proving with hundreds of papers on biosafety that our biotech crops are safe for the environment. This is clear. This is a study done by Wolfenbarger here. And that's an author who previously always shot against biotechnology and was very critical. But when she undertook a meta-study using dozens of other data and putting it into a proper statistics, she saw insecticide effects were much larger than those of BT crops. Clear. So why don't we replace the conventional maize crops in Europe by the BT crops? That would be reasonable, you know. And they would also be healthier. Organic farming and modern agriculture, including genetic engineering, cannot go together. That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I have here a T-shirt with the emblem of gene peace. Not green peas, gene peas. That means I am a promoter of making peace between biotechnology and organic farming. And the ideal plants for organic farming would be the biotech crops, at least certain, not the herbicide-tolerant crops, of course, but all the others. Anyway, why high-tech farmers should adopt organic management? I wrote a long paper about that. And the other way around, why organic farmers should adopt biotech plants. And here a couple married. She is the biotech lady in the lab working in California, and he is the organic farmer. They're happily married, and they work together. Huh? And they wrote the Tomorrow's Table, a very popular book. I recommend you to read it. Then my family name is Ammann, and Jacob Ammann was the founder of the Amish in 1642. And actually, I went to these guys and had a debate, 2.5 hours. Then I convinced them to use transgenic plants as organic farmers. Old order Amish farmers, the non-touristic ones, nota bene. And actually, half of this community in Lancaster, the north of Washington, they are using now transgenic plants and still think they are organic farmers. This is an organic farmer here from Holland. You wouldn't guess. So organic farming and Amish, yes, that's one of the variants, but organic farming can be something very modern. You can even go organic in Kuwait if you do it the right way. But there is still a problem with organic farming, that's the yield. You see, red, the organic yield, the US yield, green, so it's clear. All proper statistics show that organic farmers still have a yield problem. We need to revisit the definition of sustainable development, which has been established on an international level by the UN Brundtland Report some decades ago. The definition, if you read it fully, is still holding properly valid, because the opponents of biotechnology and any progress in agriculture, they think that the Brundtland Report is propagating a kind of sustainability which is defensive, not touch modern agriculture and so on. But actually the Brundtland Report says the contrary. They say we can only maintain sustainability and create it in the future decades if we allow progress and innovation. Only this will be the foundation. As Maggie said, the foundation of sustainability is innovation and not conservation, to go back to the old production methods. Yeah, and another myth is that genetic engineering is fundamentally different from natural mutation. That's my latest hobby. I think this is wrong. Natural mutation and transgenic plant processes are exactly the same on a molecular level. Local small changes in the nucleotide sequences, internal reshuffling of genomic DNA segments, and acquisition of usually rather small segments of DNA. Exactly the same three processes for natural mutation and transgenesis. So it's dead wrong to concentrate on transgenics as the only risky thing. The Canadians, they are the only reasonable people in the regulation. They speak about novel crops, whether transgenic or not. They do not care. They care about the novelty of the crop and the product, and then they regulate if necessary. Anyway, there's a lot of literature showing that transgenic crops are less genomically disturbed than conventional crops. Another myth to kill. Anyway, we hop over this. Transgenesis has less impact on the transcriptome of wheat grain than conventional breeding. There are now dozens of such genomic analyses showing that actually the transgenic crops are the cleaner ones, the less disturbed ones than the non-transgenic ones. So if organic farmers are still resisting and saying this is disturbed material, we shouldn't use it because it's not the original genome, then they are wrong. They don't know what they are talking about. They should use the transgenic crops because they are less disturbed genomically. Anyway, the shock was some decades ago that people discovered, being very much involved in fighting against transgenesis, that radiation mutation was applied to about 70% of the crops worldwide. That's an official FAO statistics. And radiation mutation is much worse than transgenesis. It's bombarding the whole genome. So actually, I went to Barilla in Milano to the highest level in the company, and I said, well, I show you now a very provocative slide. It's a Barilla Frankenstein Farfalle, and they didn't like it at all. But then I said, this is what usually Greenpeace would tell you as a scaremonger picture. But I am usually showing it only by saying these radiation-mutated plants have had fantastic repair systems, and they are practically as clean as normal conventional crops. So don't worry. And then they were pleased again. Anyway, I don't want to go into the details here. But this biosafety attitude of the Europeans, I can only mock myself about. Or here, the Cartagena Protocol, focusing on transgenesis alone. That's about the picture I have from the Cartagena Protocol. Yeah. It's taken from the website of Strange Vehicles. You will have a big laugh there. Yeah. Or here, the Biosafety Protocol 2006 totally stuck in concrete. Anyway, I want to just skip this, except this one. We must change the regulations. We must rethink and allow more innovation by having a better, more science-based regulation, not focusing on transgenesis alone, but on innovative crops as a whole by the product. Just I want to finish with the religions. We had a Vatican conference being very positive in the conclusions about transgenesis. And we had also organized 2 world conferences, Halal Forum in 2010 and the Sharia Compliance Conference in 2010 as well. And both came to very positive conclusions about biotechnology and crops, no doubt. So if you hear that the Quran or any mullah is against transgenesis or against biotechnology, that's just pure nonsense. Anyway, this is unfortunately the dialogue we have today with the opponents. And I just want to show you the last slide from my wife. If we cannot prevent us with new ways of communication by introducing a kind of a question culture, by listening to each other, and if we cannot prevent these choice questions with science, it will disengage from the questionnaires and will not be human science anymore. Thus, we need a new humility ourselves as scientists as well, and of thinking, as it has been wonderfully defined by the German philosopher Heidegger, and that's a citation from my wife. The question is the devoutness of thinking. So it is necessary to listen to opponents. But then we have a chance to get into a dialogue and kill a few myths and listen and learn from their views what is necessary to develop further on our agricultural biotechnology. Thank you for listening.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I have some little comments. First, to what Professor Hasuna said, Desertec is not an energy concept for Europe. It is an energy concept for the Middle East and North Africa, and moreover, for all the world. Europe will take just 15% from its needs, which are about 17% of the production in MENA countries, which is a small part of it, to secure its energy supply, just to secure the fluctuations, but it's not for the energy supply itself. The second comment is what Professor Aman said about if somebody tells you Quran says it is against innovation, don't believe him. Really, you are right. Don't believe him, because the Quran is clearly stating that the new knowledge and each believer has to seek for knowledge and find new new knowledge. The third comment is about the pollution in Kuwait. I don't think that Kuwait is the champion in pollution of the shores. There are two other areas, at least to my knowledge, which may compete to it. One of them is in Canada because of the wastes of water coming from extracting shale oil, and the second one is at the shores of Ashkelon in Israel, Asqalan. But now we go to our subject. For 10 billion people, well, Margaret has already said we are heading for 9, but, oh, I forgot to put this. We are heading for 10 billion in 2050. We will need 3 planets. How can we manage with our sole only one planet? Why do we need so much? Increasing population. And when we look at the statistics, where are the population is increasing? It's not increasing in the areas which are well developed, industrial areas. The population is highly increasing in less developed countries. So that we are now in a very critical situation. The resources are just sufficient for 3 billion people. We are already 7 billion, and in short time we will reach 10 billion. One of the issues which the people need for development, as said by both esteemed speakers before, it is energy. So let us look, where is energy lacking? Is it really lacking? Look at the deserts and the energy of the sun which is falling on them. These are the deserts of the world, and they receive 3,000 petawatt-hour each year, while the humanity needs only 18. The humanity needs this small square. So if we divide the deserts and call them desertic regions, then we find that one region is the region around the Mediterranean, of which we are speaking about, the first one which is looking forward to implement this. But there are several other regions, for example, in Asia, China, and Japan, and Australia. Let us have a closer look to our region around the Mediterranean. We are in the city now on the Mediterranean directly, and the peoples around the Mediterranean are growing in population, growing in economy. Both growth need electricity. And a very important institute in Germany called the DLR, German Aerospace Center, they have communication with the satellites and can measure a lot of measurements on the Earth. And they found that they have to make a study. They got a budget for a study to look about the needs of energy, of electricity for the peoples around the Mediterranean. And when we look at that, we find that it is increasing rapidly, so that in the year 2050, it will reach 4,000 terawatt-hour per year. Perhaps this doesn't mean anything to you, but compare it to the consumption of Europe, it is nearly the consumption of Europe. So how can this be achieved? How can the peoples around the Mediterranean produce so much electricity? The first thought, conventionally, gas and oil is in their land, so they will use it, business as usual. But if they use this, there may be a much quicker catastrophe on the Earth than we are thinking now. What is the alternative? The alternative for both of the sides of the Mediterranean, north and south, will need about 7,500 terawatt, about double as much as I said before. Let us look at the alternatives. Biomass, there is energy, which is possible to be grown from the earth. Geothermal, there is also heat inside the earth, which can be pumped and used. Wind power is everywhere, but not in the same intensity everywhere. For example, here at the northern Europe and Scotland, and also at the Atlas shores, and in Egypt, at the shores of the Gulf of Suez, there is a good wind, but not everywhere. Hydropower is also distributed in some parts, in Scandinavia, in the Alps, in Turkey, and at the rivers. But you find also that the sun is the one which has the highest potential. Just try to add all these. This is the economic potential of these resources. You'll find that it is not sufficient for the 7,500. But the sun alone is sufficient to cover it several times. Well, connection between North and South. Some people think it is a European idea. No, the idea started 1987 and was the idea of the minister Maher Abaza from Egypt, at that time the minister of electricity. He talked to the prime minister of Turkey and asked him about this idea. He said, it's a good idea. Let us make a conference together and try to do that. And this was the first idea they made. And this is how it looks like now. It is much more developed and not everywhere connected. This part is still under test, and this part between Syria and Turkey is also not connected. But the connection between Morocco and Spain is there, and it will be increased now from 1,400 to 2,100 megawatts. But the important thing is that it is still developing, and now there is a project to have exchange of electricity between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, because in Saudi Arabia, the peak of use of electricity is about noon because of the immense quantity of cooling equipment there, air conditioning. And in Egypt, the normal peak is 1 hour after sunset. So at noon, they send 3,000 megawatt to Saudi Arabia, and after sunset, they get them back to Egypt, 3,000 megawatt. Over a distance of 1,400 kilometers, and this distance has natural losses. Losses are in the range of 5%, but this is much less than building power stations in each country which are working only for 2 or 3 hours during the summer, and all the year they are not working. So the idea which the studies of the DLR have adopted, they tried to find out what are the possibilities to transport electricity or part of the electricity from the south to the north. And they found that it will be sufficient to have 20 lines, but you have here in the map only 3 lines as examples, but at the end, 2050, 20 lines, each line transporting 5 gigawatt. This is the electricity generated by 5 atomic power stations. Can be transported over 1 line, and the losses will be in the range of 10 to 15% over the whole distance. At the end, we can look at the idea in this way, having a strong grid connecting all different parts with renewable energy production. Wind in Northern Europe, water in Scandinavia, photovoltaic nearly everywhere, geothermal in Spain, Italy, and Turkey. But the biggest potential will be from the sun, which is mainly in North Africa. And so we can see that this small square will be sufficient to give electricity for the whole world. This grid has to be a strong grid so that the different sources of energy can support one another when they have fluctuations. And this is the idea of it. How can it be collected? With mirrors in this way, for example, parabolic mirrors concentrating on a focus here, the sun, and in the night they go back. What will be done with the heat which is collected? It is the same heat which is used in a steam boiler, burning oil or gas or coal to make steam and let it go through a turbine to push the turbine and turn a generator. After that, it is taken to a condenser to be cooled and get it to water again and pump it inside. So it is not a use of water, it is just in a closed cycle. The water is here. The steam turns the turbine, and it is not just one or two rows, it is several rows as seen here in a big turbine. Let us imagine a normal power station working with fossil fuel in the black circle. So the first step will be to build a solar field of mirrors beside it, so large so that it gets all the heat which is needed for the turbine. So the turbine will be turned in the day from the sun. You can shut down the boiler and shut it on again in the night when it is needed. The power station will work just as a normal power station. Each power station has to be cooled, cooling of it. If this power station is beside the seashore, then the cooling of it can be made by seawater. You heat a part of this seawater, evaporate it, and condense it again, so you get desalted seawater. This is the alternative to the membranes. It is distillation. With the time, when we have enough experience, we can put another solar field beside the first one and take the heat of it to a thermal storage, like a thermos, and use this heat, which is stored during the day, to give enough heat for the turbine during the night. There are some days in North Africa with sandstorms. So all this will not operate, but you still have your backup boiler where you can use biofuel, for example, to bridge 2 or 3 or 4 days in the year, which is about 1% of the year. So you don't have new investments. It is the same power station. You just use the backup boiler for the days where it is needed. What will happen at 2050 if we look at this way? In the MENA countries, they are still using a lot of oil for making electricity, and they continue to use it till 2030, but then it will be less and less, and it is replaced mainly by concentrating solar power. But also the other ones, biomass, wind, hydropower, photovoltaic, are also used. And In addition, 20% more for export and 15% more for desalination. So mainly in 2050, we are looking forward to have 85% renewables in the MENA region, mainly from the sun. Europe will have the same evolution, but in different terms. A lot of the nuclear will be shut down till 2045, and coal much less. And the rest will come from North Africa, only 17%. But North Africa has another problem, water. And this shows how the water shortage is in a lot of the countries. When you have a lot of sources, you try to extract from the wells, but the wells cannot give you more than that. So this is the map of over-extracting wells. And this is the study which shows where are we going to if you continue the business as usual. This is the water use, including reuse technologies, including everything which is possible to reduce water usage. But still, in 2050, this region will need 2 Niles, 2 extra Niles. This can be partly compensated if we build power stations having the sun, which will be with the time cheaper than power stations using fossil fuel. And the difference in price here can be put to subsidize the water. And then we get the water to always reducing prices, and the prices of the water are controlled mainly by the interest rate. In this case, we can speak with the banks. Interest rate shall not be 10% for water projects. Please take 5% or less, because water is a social product, which everybody needs it, even the bank directors. And the second one is not each water is like the water. Desalted water, which is not well treated, may cause harm. This is a picture from Bahrain, the area which was used before starting pumping from the wells was the green area you see. Then they pumped more and more from the wells. The wells got salted, bit salted with the time, but they get a larger area, and after 10 years, it is smaller. The area is smaller than the original area because the fields are too much salty and they cannot give product. For this, we need experts, we need education, and that's why the university network, the Desert Tech University network, was founded. And that's also why there are some courses for renewable energy, for example, between Kassel and Cairo. Looking at the future, the population will be much more, but the solutions are there. The deserts can deliver energy to 90% of the population of the world. So you can read this.
I think that we are running out of time, so...
Okay, this is the last one.
Okay.
We need innovation, high quality of products, and standardization, and the Desert Tech Foundation is contributing by giving the Desert Tech Sustainable Project when a project like this one gets this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I think I'm between you and the lunch, so I'll try to make 15 minutes or so from your time, hopefully will be useful for you. First of all, I would like to indicate that this presentation was actually scheduled to be conducted by the Director General of ICARDA, Dr. Mahmoud Al-Suluh. For reasons beyond his control, he was not able to make it, just because of the interest of ICARDA in participating in the BioVision conferences. Very pleased to be with you today to share with you what he would have liked actually to present to you today. At the same time, I would like to acknowledge and thank the organizers for including ICARDA in the BioVision and inviting us to be part of this presentation or event. You have problems, and I do have problems. We hear different views. The problem now today for me is that I'm speaking after 4 or 3 eminent professionals. So there is the ceiling. So I will try to present to you some of the information in little bit details, which hopefully will address some of the questions and points that was discussed and addressed by the previous speakers. I will not be like them. The other problems that we know, that agriculture production has increased over the years. In 1996 and 2010, we needed 300% more of what we used to have in terms of agricultural production. Between 1960 and current time, our water use and demand has increased by 200%. If we see the numbers of the populations and the livelihoods and the income of some or many of the people around the world, and the change in the habit and the cultural practices that we exert every day in our houses, we think that we will need more food for the future. You saw the numbers, 7 billion. It's coming to 9 billion worldwide. It is coming very soon. There is a pressure on us as professionals to meet the demand. The issues in here, how to meet the demands. We have a lot of science, we have a lot of knowledge, we are capable and able to even do further in that. The issues is how can further extract or squeeze this planet Earth. So the problems or the challenge actually that we have, all of us, is to have a balance on meeting the demand of the planet's population and ensuring the sustainability of this limited resources that we have. In this exercise, what I would like to do is just to show with you one practice, and we call it kind of the future for agriculture. Before I start, if we know that if we need to increase our production, we have 70% of the potential is coming from intensification of the current agricultural production system. Should come from there. 20% should come from the diversification and the best management or improved management of the current agriculture system what we have. Only 10% of the potential increase in food production would come from new areas. So we have serious limited things that we need to do. The other issues that we have heard during the past few days, couple days actually, yesterday and today, the great advancement in science and in the technology and in the biotechnology and on the cell science and on the nanotechnology and all of these. How can we collectively, as scientists and professionals, put this knowledge together and produce for less resources? In other words, for less land and less water. One of the things that we are doing in here, at least attempting to improve or sustain the land productivity by a system, what we call it conservation agriculture. This is not brand new. This is something that has been gone for years. Worldwide, currently we have 7 million hectares of land used conservation agriculture. And I don't want to read the benefit of that. It's just to mentioning that we'll have more income to the end user, to the farmers, if you use this technology. ICARDA as International Center for Agriculture Research in a dry area, underscore the dry areas. Dry areas, which means, just for you to visualize, in Egypt, the average precipitation that come on us every year is about 0.7 cubic meter per hectare. The less amount a crop needs, which is the word crop requirements for a season, is at least between 3 to 12 cubic meter. The difference between the 0.7, which is an average, and the demand, which is about, I would say, 6, 7, 8 to 10, 12 cubic meter, 1,000 cubic meter per hectare, needs to come from limited water resources that we have. And if we do not use that, then we don't have really a good agricultural production system, which we call it a dry land agriculture. So ICARDA's task is really a major one, because 40% of the world's population live in these dry areas, which is in the precipitation area less than 200 millimeter per year. So with that, we are looking for ways to conserve soil moisture, to increase or improve crop varieties, and to find ways that the farmers can intensify and diversify the production system that we have. And this is what we are doing. Furthermore, we are combining the system as an integrated production system, which is combining the crop, the soil, the water, and the livestock with the farmer's need, which is what we call it integrated production system. Add to that, we are attempting in our capacities is to tailor the agricultural production system based on the knowledge and the need of the communities, as well as the priorities of the countries. And this is what we call socio-economic studies in any technologies that we have been developing. And these technologies, we introduced it in here about 3 years back, or 4 years, is to have what we call it conservation agriculture, no-tillage, just to go ahead and plant the seeds and keep the stubbles in the ground, of course, in a scientific way. And as a result, you will save a lot of time, you will save a lot of fuel, you will save machineries, you will save water, moisture, evaporation from the soil if you disturb the soil, and you will improve the soil from trafficability problems, and you will have a higher yield, and you will reduce a major one, which was shown in the slide, is the soil erosion of the soil. The problem is that 85% of the people who are producing the food, not the total production in the world, particularly the developing world, is the small farmers. When we talk about small farmers, we're talking about 0.5, maybe to 5 acres, or 1 or 2 hectares maximum. And these are 85% of the people. So for ICARDA, we are trying to target the need of this population, which is the small resource farmers. So to do that, the farmers can do it, but it's very expensive. So what we did, we tried to compare, can we develop machine that will help the farmers to produce crop at lower cost? And we were successful working with the scientists from Syria, scientists from Iraq, and currently scientists from Egypt to develop a machinery that will be affordable by the farmers. The machine that you are seeing here on the screen, it costs, if you import it, between $25,000, $30,000 to about $60,000. None of the farmers will be using it. None of the 10 farmers will be using it. None of the 15 farmers in our income and the income of the farmers in dry areas will be using it. So we were able to produce this machine at a very cost, which is about, I would say, $1,400 to $5,000 a machine. This machine, when the farmers start using it, they loved it, they liked it. At the end of the day, they have more money in their pockets, and this is what they are interested in. And of course, better production. So if you look into this production curve that we have in the last few years in West Asia, you notice that we have started with no farmers in 2006, 2007 crop years. And currently we have over 800 farmers in Syria using this technology. And we have about 400 farmers and about, I would say, in Iraq also the number of farmers. The total production, actually, it is about 27,000 hectares. This is just only in 3-4 years. The way to go. The driving force, one would ask what it is, and actually it is the soil moisture mainly, which is the water resources. The second is the cost associated with the production system, and would be the better understanding of the impact pathways, impact pathways, which is important for the government as well as for the farmers' family and communities and associations. And of course, we would have enabling policy that help that system. One question would be, do we have it in Egypt? The comment this morning in other presentations say we had it 0 conservation agriculture in Egypt 10 years back. We had it 0 5 years back, and we still have it 0 this year, current. Why? My answer to you, being in Egypt for a few years, working with many scientists of Egypt in different research sites, we do have it. But what I call it Egypt conservation agriculture. It is a unique system in the Egypt farmers in the Delta. However, it is unplanned conservation agriculture. That's why you don't find it in the publications. But if you go to any farmers now on a small holding, you might see easily 2 to 3 crops growing together in different ages. I have seen wheat with cotton and with onions on the same crops. You imagine the amount of water that one can save it. We did not introduce that system to them. We introduced our irrigation methodology to the farmer, but he was smart enough to introduce this intercropping. And I asked the farmer why. He said, because I'm getting better yield, this water use, and actually less pesticide, because there's a physiology between the different 3 plants that will reduce the soil disease as well as maybe the pest and insecticide. So we have that. The question is, can we scale it up? Can we introduce it? And we are attempting, and we have several projects that we are working on. We started last year, and we hope that this technology will pick up in countries like Egypt as conservation agriculture. Of course, I'm not saying that this is shiny technology. Please understand me, that there are problems with that. There are problems with disease. There are problems with soil. There's problems with lack of oxygen in the soil. And the question is, how can we make it optimal for the agriculture production systems in the country that we are working on? Currently, we are working in Sudan, in North Africa and Morocco, as well as in Egypt, with some site in Ethiopia, and we are trying to develop different production system. And how many years can we keep the soil without disturbance? What crops can we plant? And how can we do it? How deep we can go? All of these scientific questions are being actually investigated so we can provide the simple technology to the farmer. The agriculture system and environment, they are not an enemy. I must say that. Both of them live together, and they can and will. If you are an irrigation specialist, or you have seen a farmer blowing the ground for irrigation technique or water coming through the furrows, you see how many birds are coming in the front of the water while the water is moving, actually. You will be very clear, and the reason why, because this water pushed down the field is pushing some of the insects and some of the things that the birds like it, so you feel that it is making a feed for the animals. How many of you saw a rice field with plenty of water and plenty of migrated birds around them? So there is a combination of it, and this is what we are looking to do, is to develop an understanding that the production system is not a monocultural issue, and it is not only on the farm, it is also beyond the farm, and our farmers started to do that. The other thing is the dry areas. Add to that is livestock, which is part of the agriculture system. All of you maybe have heard on the last disaster that took place in the Horn of Africa. And the reason why they have this famine is not because of lack of water, as some of the media mentioned, or lack of the knowledge of the people. Actually, it's just because of lack of the feed for the livestock that they had. And this is the major problem. They were not able and capable to have enough stock to keep this drought, which they had for 3, 4, 5 years. So the issues of livestock integration with the natural pasture and rangeland is an important system that we have to do. And I think ICARDA is working as well in that issues in the Horn of Africa to help advance or accelerate or for making rapid deployment of the technologies that we have developed over the year to help the people of the Horn of Africa. In addition to that, our scientists are closely working to see how can we increase the productivity and the quality of the meat within the production system that we have in Egypt. And this is kind of the characterization of the small ruminants, what we call them sheep and goats, in the different part of the arid world. If you are interested, go to our website, go to our publication, see what kind of breeds that we have here in Egypt, or we have in South America, or we have in Central Asia. And this is where we have the interaction. Believe or not, this is the desert that animals used to have zero in drought years to eat. And this is kind of being reduced, and the farmers are which doing this plantations are making money. The one to your right, which shows my left in here, to your left is the cactus. And many of the young fellows, I would say here, the professionals, girls, maybe they have seen a product called Olay, the company of Olay. The base of that company is the cactus that you see it over here. So we are not only can produce it for animal, but to produce it as an income from the agricultural industry as well. And the other one would be the shrubs, which is salt tolerance crops. In conclusions, the way to go is to have conservation and sustainable use of agricultural natural resources. That would help us to cope with the implication of the climate change that we have already witnessed. That will help us to combat the desertification issues that's facing all of us. And you have heard maybe during the couple of days that a rate of 2 million hectares every year is becoming out of the production due to desertification. That we have to apply the science and technology. It is available there. It is on the shelves. You come to my office, I would give you 6, 7 technologies that can be developed. The problem is why it's not reaching the farmers. And I think it is not my problem. I can help with it, but we need the help of others to take it out. We have tried one project in Egypt last year. Why the farmers are not adopting the high productive wheat, and here in the country we are still importing 60% of the wheat? Simple. They do not have guarantee that the new varieties will produce more for them. So why should they take the risk? There is a risk. So what we did, we came to them and we said, please try these varieties with this technology. This is the package. And if you produce less, we will help you. None of the farmers, which is 100 in Kafr Sheikh area, produce less than 15% more what they used to have. This year, we have 450 farmers using the same technologies. We did not push very hard. They started to have the seeds and the technology and implement it. So they have technologies. And the rural development and commercialization of agriculture, this is something that we have to work as the communities on it. We cannot just keep the youngs to go to the cities and get lost in the city by being parking lot keepers or whatever in the banks. And we have to have some attraction to them to become farmers, because this is enjoyable if they know how to do it, and profitable as well. By the way, just for the record, I have heard from many that agriculture is not a good investment. The last report that I have seen that agriculture is the #1 investment, and its return is 28% compared even to any other industries in the world. So the question is how to invest our money and not to be losers. And compliance with the international agreements and UN conventions, and this is related to the resources that we have. In the Arab region, as you might know, 65% of our water resources coming from our neighbors. And we have to work with them through an agreement, through an international laws, to have a better understanding and collaborative spirit, so both the communities can live together, or all the communities included. The other one, which is related to the future, actually, between environment and agriculture, is to practice the good agricultural practices, or GAP, to have sustainable water resources. You cannot withdraw, and I think you saw from the previous speakers about the groundwater depletion, what we call it, or the saltwater intrusion because of the overpumpage of the groundwater, and to have an integrated pest management approach, as well as integrated plant nutrient system approach. I wish that you had heard the presentation in the morning from the fellow from Dr. Kassam from the FAO, which showed you, and a professor, I think, from Cornell University, showed the production of the same varieties, but with a better integrated soil water management relationship. And finally, I would say that it is also, the no-tillage conservation is the way to go. Of course, there are some questions we need to answer, but I think should be able to introduce it very nicely and quickly. And of course, organic agriculture is another thing that we should look at it, and perhaps we started to see. Thank you very much.